Okay, ready for a deep dive into a profession that's surprisingly fascinating.
I'd say so. It's one that most people don't think about every day.
But we're surrounded by the results of it.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. Every book you've ever picked up, every magazine, every catalog,
They all have pages that are bound together somehow.
and that's where our deep dive takes us today, into the world of the book sewing machine operator.
So we've got blueprints, industry reports, even some stories from people who work in printing and bookbinding.
And we're going to use all of that to really understand what this job is all about.
It's like a bridge between, like, old school craftsmanship and modern technology, right?
Exactly. You've got these amazing machines, but it still takes a skilled operator to make sure everything runs smoothly.
So let's break it down. What does a book sewing machine operator actually do all day?
Well, picture this. You're on the factory floor of a printing facility.
Okay, I'm imagining the smell of ink in the air, the sound of machinery.
You got it. It's a bustling environment. And our operator is stationed at their machine.
Which I'm guessing is not your grandma's sewing machine, right?
Definitely not. These machines are incredibly precise. They feed in stacks of what are called signatures.
Signatures, is that like autographs or something?
Not quite. Signatures are basically the folded sections that make up a book's pages.
Ah, okay.
So the operator makes sure these signatures are lined up perfectly, and then the machine sews them together.
With, like, really strong threads so the pages don't fall out.
Exactly. It's all about creating a secure, durable binding. But here's the thing. It's not as simple as just feeding the machine and pressing a button.
There's more to it than that.
Oh, absolutely. The operator needs to adjust the machine settings depending on the type of book they're binding.
So, like, a paperback versus a textbook would be different.
Exactly. Different paper types, different sizes, different binding methods the operator has to be able to adapt.
That's a lot of attention to detail.
It definitely is. They're troubleshooting jams, fine-tuning the thread tension, constantly doing quality checks.
Because one little mistake at the beginning could mess up the whole book.
You got it. So it's a job that requires a lot of focus and precision.
But even if they do everything perfectly, isn't the printing industry kind of, well, struggling?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? With ebooks and digital reading and all that.
So are there even enough jobs out there for these skilled workers?
Well, the industry has definitely changed. There's no doubt about that.
But it hasn't disappeared completely.
Not at all. In fact, there are certain types of books that are actually seeing a resurgence.
Really? What kinds of books?
Think about those beautiful art books with thick pages and high-quality prints.
Or those collector's editions with fancy covers and bindings?
Those are great examples. Those books often require a level of craftsmanship that you can't get from mass production.
So there's still a demand for that human touch.
Exactly. And that's where our skilled book sewing machine operators come in.
It's like they're part of this long tradition of bookmaking, you know?
Absolutely. They're carrying on a craft that's centuries old.
So we've got a good sense of what they do in the industry they work in. But what about the work environment itself?
Well, it's definitely not your typical office job.
I bet. I'm imagining loud machinery, maybe some safety hazards to think about.
It can be pretty demanding, yeah. You're on your feet a lot, dealing with heavy materials.
Definitely not for the faint of heart.
That's for sure. But for the right person, it can be a really rewarding job.
Okay, so it's physically demanding, but also pretty fascinating. You're part of creating something tangible, something that people will hold in their hands.
And something that can last for generations.
So how does someone even get started in this field? If you're listening and thinking, hey, that sounds like something I'd be interested in. What's the first step?
Well, it's not like other jobs where you just, send in a resume and hope for the best.
It's not as easy as clicking apply now on a job site.
Right. It's a lot more about hands-on learning in this field.
So like an apprenticeship.
Yeah, exactly. You'd probably start by learning from experienced operators, getting a feel for the machinery.
So really understanding how the machines work, not just how to operate them.
Exactly. It's about mastering those fundamental skills.
Like loading the signatures, threading the machine, all that good stuff.
Right. And then as you get more experience, you start developing a kind of sixth sense for it.
A sixth sense.
Yeah.
Huh? Like you can sense when something is off with the machine just by the sound.
Kind of. You start to notice subtle changes in the rhythm, the tension, little details that most people wouldn't even pick up on.
So it becomes almost intuitive after a while.
That's a good way to put it. It's like any skilled trade, the more you do it, the more you develop that intuition.
So you start with the basics, you learn from the pros, you develop your skills and your intuition. What comes next? What does a typical career path look like for a book sewing machine operator?
Well, there are a few different directions you could go in.
Okay, lay it on me.
Some people really enjoy the management side of things, so they might move into a supervisory role.
So overseeing a whole team of operators, making sure everything is running smoothly.
Exactly. They might be responsible for training new hires, managing production schedules, things like that.
Okay, so that's one path. What about people who really love the hands-on part of the job?
Well, they might choose to specialize in a particular type of binding or a certain type of book.
Oh, interesting. So you could become like a master of hardcover books or something.
Exactly. Or maybe you become the go-to person for those really complex multi-section art books.
I can see how that would be really rewarding, becoming an expert in a specific niche.
It definitely is, and that kind of expertise is highly valued in the industry.
So there's definitely room for growth and specialization in this field.
Absolutely. It's not just a dead-end job.
Okay, so let's talk about the pros and cons for a minute. What are some of the most rewarding aspects of this career path?
Well, for starters, you're working with your hands, creating something tangible. And not just something, but books.
Which have such a rich history and cultural significance.
Exactly. You're part of this long tradition of bookmaking. And like we talked about earlier, those skills are still in demand.
So there's a certain level of job security that comes with that.
That's right. And for a lot of people, there's a real sense of satisfaction that comes from knowing that you're playing a role and preserving the written word.
That's a pretty powerful feeling, I imagine.
It really is. But of course, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Right. Every job has its downsides.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that someone might encounter in this line of work?
Well, like we mentioned earlier, it can be physically demanding. You're on your feet a lot, often lifting heavy materials.
And the work environment itself can be intense.
It can be. It can be loud. There's machinery involved. And some people find the repetitive nature of certain tasks to be a bit monotonous.
So you really have to have a passion for the craft and a tolerance for that kind of environment to thrive.
I'd say that's accurate, but for the right person, it can be an incredibly fulfilling career.
Okay, so let's say someone is listening to this and they're hooked. They love the idea of working with their hands. They're fascinated by the bookbinding process. What advice would you give them? What's the best way to get started in this field?
The best advice I can give is to get some hands-on experience.
Okay, so don't just send out resumes blindly.
Right. Look for internships or apprenticeships at printing companies or bookbinding businesses.
Even if it's just volunteer work at first, just to get your foot in the door.
Exactly. And while you're at it, start networking. Go to industry events. Connect with people online.
So really immerse yourself in the bookbinding world. Show people that you're passionate and eager to learn.
Exactly. That passion will take you a long way in this field.
So we've talked about getting experience, networking, building your skills. But what about the actual job application process?
Ah, yes. Navigating the digital world of job hunting. Well, we'll dive into that in our final segment.
So we're back, and I'm really curious about this digital world of job hunting. It's kind of intimidating.
It can be, especially if you're used to, more traditional ways of finding a job.
Right, like looking in the newspaper or hearing about openings through word of mouth.
Exactly. Things have definitely changed.
So you mentioned a platform called RoleCatcher.
Oh, yeah, that's one tool that can be really helpful.
Okay, so remind us again what it is and how it works.
Basically, it uses AI to analyze job descriptions and figure out what skills and experience employers are looking for.
Ah, so it's like having a secret decoder ring for those sometimes confusing job postings.
Right. It can cut through the jargon and pinpoint exactly what you need to highlight on your resume.
But I'm guessing that's especially helpful in a niche field like bookbinding.
Absolutely. Because you're not just competing with other book sewing machine operators.
You're competing with anyone who knows how to use a sewing machine, even if it's just for clothes.
Exactly. So you need to make sure your application showcases the specific skills and experience that are relevant to this industry.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the cool thing about RoleCatcher is that it can actually help you identify any gaps in your resume.
Oh, so it's not just about finding the right jobs. It's about making sure you're the right candidate.
You got it. It can even suggest things like relevant courses you could take or volunteer opportunities that would boost your resume.
So it's like having a personal career coach in your pocket.
In a way, yeah. It can give you that extra edge in the job market.
And speaking of an extra edge, I'm thinking back to those networking tips we talked about earlier.
Can't stress this enough.
It's all about making those connections, showing people you're serious about this field.
And getting your name out there.
So it sounds like the key takeaway here is that even though we're talking about machines and technology, landing a job as a book sewing machine operator is still about human connection.
100%. You need to be able to demonstrate your passion, your skills, and your commitment to the craft.
Because at the end of the day, it's people who are making those hiring decisions.
And people who are reading those books.
That's a great point. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage our listeners to think about the next time they pick up a book.
To really appreciate the journey it took to get there.
All the steps involved, from the writing to the printing to the binding.
And the skilled craftspeople who make it all possible.
Because it's a beautiful process and one that's worth celebrating.
I couldn't agree more.
So until next time, happy reading, everyone.